Greetings and welcome everyone to Array Global's Back to School Workshop Series. We're really excited to have you with us today. I hear a little bit of back feed. Anyway, welcome to the workshop today. We're really excited, especially because we have Dr. Ray with us. He's going to be our main presenter, and we're excited to hear his thoughts and his ideas about curriculum. I know many of you have been very excited to hear this workshop. It's back because of so much responses that you have made. He's given this workshop before a couple years ago in face-to-face in Saudi, and now we're excited to have this online and hear his great thoughts as we work in developing our curriculum for the coming year. We have special welcome for many people from the ministries of education that we have. We have a lot of our consultants on right now, a lot of our representatives. We have our associate directors with us. One that we wanted to specifically point out, I think Mr. Danny is on with us. Danny Eichelberger. Are you here, Danny? He had been traveling, so.
There he is.
Is he here?
Yeah, he's here now.
Oh, okay. Danny, do you want to say a few words? He might have a hard time getting connected right now because of his.
Well, he's connected. He just needs to unmute.
Oh. Let's see, where's Danny? There he is. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Danny, there you are. I think when you came back
Okay.
on and got back off, you lost the co-host status.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I am so excited to hear Dr. Lindley today. I know he's got an amazing presentation. And I'm Danny Eichelberger, new Associate Director with Array Global. And I'm so excited. I think back to these last year and a half and how much I've enjoyed having this extended family to help me professionally in my work and in education. And what a great venture we've all jumped into here together. And I enjoy these weekends. And thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, Danny, and welcome. A few different announcements that we want to make. If you have comments or questions, please put those in the chat. We will try to address them as we go through this workshop. If there's any way that we can help you and support you as Array Global, please let us also know. A couple really neat announcements we wanted to make. The first of which is we are going to be doing an academic competition for all of your students. It's called Write Around the World, like WRITE, around the world. And students will be able to submit essays, a 500-word essay about how they can improve the world around them, or they could submit a poem of their choice. Those will be due at the end of October. Announcements will be coming out, but you can start talking to your students about that as they come back to school. I think that'd be really exciting for them. Also, we're requesting that as schools get started, that you send us your first day of school pictures. Send us pictures of your school, your students getting in, your students getting excited. Some of you may be doing virtual schools. Take pictures of that too. We want to recognize you and your schools and the great work that you do with the entire family of people that we're in contact with and whom we work with. I will post this here in the chat a little bit. You can send those pictures to our email address, and we'll post those on our social media. Also, just like to announce that Dr. Ray will be in Saudi Arabia. He'll be in Riyadh in September. Last week we put out a survey. That'll also be posted on our social media. I'll put it here in the chat in a minute. Please fill out the form. We're going to try and get back to everyone in setting up a time that will work for them, either at their school or at Dr. Ray's hotel or at a mutually agreed upon place. Also, we would like to open it up to people as they get back to the first day of school. If they would like a personalized video from Array Global, personalized video from our administration, welcoming your students back, your families back to school, please let us know. We're going to post a form for that also in the chat, and you can sign up for that also. And we'd love to have you sign up for that as we do this special welcome back video, because this is a special time of year for many schools as they're opening up for the first time in months. So this might be something very special that you can utilize. So with that, with all those announcements, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ray Lindley. He is a mentor to countless individuals across the world. He's been in education for longer than many of us have been alive. I know longer than I've been alive. He's been a teacher, a counselor, a principal, a superintendent, a professor, a college administrator. The list goes on. He's been recognized by his colleagues at the university level, at the state level, at the national level. He's been president of national organizations, curriculum associations. He's traveled the world. He's visited hundreds, if not thousands, of schools. Many of you know him, many of you love him, many of you revere him, and we're excited to hear his words of wisdom, his guidance, his direction, as he continues to make an amazing influence and change in the world, and in the changes in schools, and specifically in the hearts of many, many people. So with that, Dr. Ray, we will turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Jake, for that very, very kind introduction. I wish we could just stop right there, and I don't have to say anything, because you've given me a wonderful introduction, and I appreciate that. What I'm going to do now is, and Dr. Jake might have to help me here because he's the computer guru. I see Ahmed Tantawi there, and he knows how to do this too. But I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully pretty soon my presentation. Did I get it correct, Dr. J?
Yep, you got it right off.
Great.
Yeah, this is exciting.
So, yes, for me to do it is exciting. I've often said, you've heard some of you have heard me say this. The students we're dealing with now are what we're calling computer natives, or whatever. I see Mr. Tony there, and Danny and Jake. We're all American natives. Many of you are Egyptian natives, or Saudi natives, or Pakistan natives, or whatever. But the students we're working with now are digital natives. All they've ever worked with is the internet and online stuff. And so we, many times, for instance, if I have a problem with my computer, I just simply call one of my grandsons and say, hey, I need help. And because that's all they know. And as we're working with students today, we need to understand that's what they understand. So excited today to be making this presentation entitled Curriculum, Scope, Sequence, and Continuity. I want to, as we move ahead here, did not move. There we go. Okay. Who are today's teachers? We have 200, 300, 400 of you on here today. And I like this slide. I used this several years ago, but really what we have as teachers is we have a real responsibility. Check this out. This is just one novelist who wrote this. You have to be about 40% comedian, about a 30% circus performer, about 10% parent, and if you're lucky, about 20% educator. And I'm looking out over there at many of you who are here. I see many names I recognize: Khalid and Mazar and Ahmed and Maha and Nada and Mohammed and Mustafa and Marian and Huda. Many of you I have known, and I could go on because I had many others. Those are the names I just picked off really quickly here. And you are today's teachers. And you have a responsibility unlike anything that you have ever faced before. We in Array Global have responsibilities unlike anything we have faced before. We've just gone through a whole year of virtual school, of blended learning, whatever, maybe some in person. And this is something that we've never had to face before. And if all the predictions are correct, we might have another tough year this year, depending on the COVID virus. And so we have to be ready. So my first question for you, and I don't need you to respond, but I want to ask you, What will you face this year that will be different because of last year? What will you face this year that will be different because of last year? And one of the things that really comes to my mind, because my background in psychology, it says this: we're going to be facing students who have been lonely, who have been disengaged, who have been without any outside the home adult contact, without necessarily being with their friends on a regular basis. And we have to understand that as we look at curriculum, we're facing students who have specific needs on curriculum that will have to be addressed from a personal standpoint. We can have the best curriculum in the world. We can have the best teaching plan in the world. But if we don't understand that the students that we face this year have a different need, then we're missing the importance of the curriculum. So then we go into the couple of cautions I want to put to you here. Number one, curriculum and instruction should not be used interchangeably. Curriculum is the what, and instruction is the how. So let's not mix up what we do with what we are trying to do. So we're going to be talking about curriculum today, but we're not going to go into instruction. That's a whole different workshop, a whole different time that hopefully sometime we can talk about instructional techniques, how you get students motivated, how you get students to want to do their work, how you get students to work together. That's all instruction and how we work together on instruction. But let's remember, we're talking about today the development of curriculum, and instruction is the how, and we will cover that in another workshop. There is a difference between curriculum development and curriculum mapping. Curriculum development is what we're doing today. Curriculum mapping is a term which maybe has only been used for the last few or several years. That is a different thing than curriculum development. Curriculum mapping, at its best, is once you have a curriculum, then you have an opportunity to look at that curriculum, find out where there are gaps in the curriculum, where there are some things that are repeated and we don't really see it from one grade to another, where there may be some things that are not aligned correctly to what our scope and sequence are. And the purpose of improving overall the course of study. So curriculum mapping, again, is a different subject. And we can do a workshop on curriculum mapping, how you put these pieces together and figure out what's missing, what needs to be added, what is maybe there that's probably redundant in one place or another. My best example of this is one some of you have heard me say. When I was a college administrator, my son was in the 4th grade. And so my wife and I went to the parent-teacher conference, and those are always kind of scary for kids when they see their parents are talking with their teacher. So when we went to the parent-teacher conference, and my son's teacher, his name is Ray also, and teacher said, Ray is really a nice student. He's very cooperative, but he doesn't finish his assignments. And I said, really? I said, do you have an example? So she handed a paper to us. She said, well, here's a math paper, for instance. And on the math paper, there were 20 two-digit addition problems. 20. He had done 3. 17 were undone. And so I said, good, thank you. That'll give us something to talk about at home. So when I got home, of course, our son was very anxious. What'd she say? What'd she say? Am I doing okay? And so forth. And I said to him, I said, Ray, your teacher, Mrs. Jones, has some really big concerns because you're not finishing your assignments. And he said, well, do you have an example? So I showed him this math paper. I said, you see there are 20 problems on this page. You only did 3. And he looked at me, and it was a lesson I'll never forget. He looked at me and said, Dad, look at that paper. I'm looking at it. How many problems are there? I said, 20. I did 3. Yes. Did I do all 3 of those right? And I said, yes. Why do I have to do 17 more to show her I know how to do it? That's part of curriculum mapping. And we're not going to go in here right now because many times we do redundancies, and we'll talk about ways maybe to monitor students and assess whether students are getting there or not. But that's again for another workshop. But think about curriculum mapping, because that's something that all of us will need to do as we're developing the curriculum. We've got to find out if there are holes, if there are things that are duplicated, and if there are things that maybe aren't in the right order. So let's move to Array Global here. And I just want to, excuse me, I have one more. This is an extremely important one. Curriculum is more than a textbook. A textbook is used as a resource to help teachers teach the adopted curriculum. Other instructional materials must be used in the adopted textbook. I get really concerned when I'm in a school and we start talking about curriculum. And so when I start talking with the people, I say, tell me a little bit about your curriculum. What are you using as a curriculum? Well, and of course, I'd love to see, something outlined with all the scope and sequence and so forth. And they said, oh, that's easy. We use Holt Reinhardt Winston, or we use another textbook. And I have to stop and say, this is not a curriculum. These textbooks are written to help you teach the adopted curriculum. And I know, because I've had a lot of experience with working with textbook publishers, what they do is they try to find out what your curriculum is, and they try to develop their textbooks to answer those questions. And unfortunately, a lot of the countries that we work with don't understand this basic concept. Curriculum, if you want to adopt a textbook, I was in one country and they said, well, we need to go through this textbook and see if it matches what we're teaching. And I said, no, you're wasting your time. You give the textbook company your curriculum and say, what do you have that helps us teach this? See, that's a reverse way of a lot of us thinking. Oh, well, we have to find out if this textbook is appropriate. They're making good money on these textbooks, and I don't begrudge them that. They're great. And with some wonderful, wonderful textbook companies, I work with several, and they do a wonderful job. But you, as a school, when a textbook publisher comes to you and says, here's everything you need, just use this book and you've got it all, ask them the question, have you done a cross-check with our curriculum and your textbook materials? Of course, even textbooks anymore, that term itself is not used as widely, because we use the term instructional materials, because even with the publishers, there are all kinds of things that they can offer in the curriculum that can't be covered in just a textbook. So please be sure that you understand curriculum is more than a textbook.
Hey, Dr. Ray, can I interrupt for just a little bit as you're talking about textbooks?
You just did. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Is there any way that we can get you to use your headphones? I think you're crackling a little bit, and there's quite a few comments that saying that they can't hear you. I think your headphones might work even better if you can turn those on and have them connected. I mean, we can still understand everything that you're saying. It's just not as clear as it would be otherwise.
Okay, hold on here a second. I'm just turning them on.
Aisha is telling me that I'm loud and clear, and that's good. Sometimes I am loud and clear, but I think it would just help as we're going
Chick,
through.
I'm getting a message. Low system resources may affect your audio quality. Try closing some applications to improve performance. This is the only application I have on.
Probably, yeah. I think right now you're sounding okay. Okay, are your headphones working?
No, my headphones aren't working.
Huh.
Okay, well, Jake, if something I say is not clear, let me know and I'll repeat it. But I wanted to talk about accreditation a bit here. And of course, our business in Array Global, our major business is accreditation. And we have 5 major standards in our process of accreditation of schools. And standard, we actually touch on curriculum, each of the standards. There are 6 standards, by the way, for online schools because they have some issues that are a bit different. But I wanted to list these up here and talk about just what the curriculum standards are that we look for when we come into schools. Now, these aren't all of them, but these are the major ones that we look at when we come to schools. They're aligned with the institution's mission. And we can talk a lot about the mission of the school. But if your mission is that you are preparing students for careers in electronics, we make sure that your curriculum leads to that. And things that are not part of that curriculum, you need to look at and see, does that really make sense here? The second one we have here is content standards are measurable. Every standard or curriculum standard you have should be measurable. We'll talk about that in a little bit. They clearly define what students should know at each grade level, and we'll talk about scope and sequence. Each subject area is integrated with other subject areas. We're going to talk about integration, how you can teach more than one subject at the same time in the same lesson. Instructional materials, and we just talked about, they're analyzed to ensure that they are aligned with the educational goals for each grade. And finally, students are held to high academic standards and are regularly required to use higher order thinking skills. And I want to say that many of us, when we face a classroom full of students, we know that we have a whole variety of quality, ability in the students that we engage. But we don't expect everybody to reach to the sky, but we do expect everybody to do their best at the level they can and try to move them to the next level up. And that's a high academic standard. And I've often said that the student who performs at the 10th percentile on any given test, who can advance to the 20th percentile, 10 points, is far more significant than a student who goes from the 80th to the 90th percentile. It's still 10 points. But look at this student down here who has doubled his amount. And so that's one of the reasons we look carefully at the standards. So curriculum, here's the best definition I have. Curriculum refers to the lessons and academic content in a school or in a specific course program. It typically refers to the knowledge and skills students are expected to learn, which includes learning standards or learning objectives, 2 terms that could probably be used interchangeably, learning standards or learning objectives. And so many times when we develop a curriculum, we fail to ask, what is the objective of doing this? Why are we doing this? What is the standard? What is it that we hope to help students attain? And those are the ones that we have to, sometimes in developing a curriculum, we think we do a nice job of putting this all together, and this is wonderful, and we've put this whole program together, but we fail to ask ourselves, what is it we expect students to learn? What is the standard that we want students to attain? And again, if we have a student who's growing from, say, 10th percentile to 20th, that's very significant. Doesn't mean we expect less, but we push more. So curriculum is learning standards and learning objectives.
And Dr. Ray, I have a quick question that came in through Heba, and I think it's a great question, especially dealing with what's going on with COVID. She asks, what if my students didn't meet some of the previous year's standards due to the lack of attendance or online teaching? And how can I design this year based upon that?
Well, one of the first things, and as I said, that we're going to face a different quality or kind of student this year. We know that. And that's probably one of the major problems we're going to face. So what I would suggest is that one of the things every grade level teacher, or if it's in 9 through 12, every English 10 teacher, review what should have happened last year. Okay? Let's go back if we need to, and let's make sure that there is that understanding. You'll find some students are already there, And we can use our own ingenuity to help move those students, but also take care. And probably it will take very little time to work the remedial from last year into bringing this up. I'm reminded of a school that I worked with in Riyadh a few years ago, and it was an English speaking school. And if they had a student who came into the school and did not understand or read English, they understood Arabic very well, they had a 30-day course in acquiring enough English language to get into the regular curriculum. And they found that almost all of the students were able to come up to scale within a 30-day extended course. So you might want to think about something like that. Think about some kind of a course that will bring students up to, but you got to find out where they are first. Find out what the end of the year expectation was last year. Find out from your students just who is there and who is already there and can be moved on. Teaching is an art. It's a science, but it's an art. And one of the arts that we have to understand is that we have to do our job to help find out each student where he is.
Another question, Dr. Ray, and maybe you're going to get to this as you're talking about instructional materials. But Media Ahmed, he mentioned, how do teachers decide on instructional materials? Isn't this a difficult task? In some countries, it's just not allowed.
You mean instructional materials are not allowed? Or...
Well, choosing specific different
yes,
types
yes.
of instructional materials.
I'm thinking of one particular country, Dr. Jake, that you
Yes.
and I work with. The ministry tells teachers, this is what you will use. And if you are faced with that situation, then I think what you have to do is look carefully at the material to see if it really is addressing the curriculum which you have adopted in your school. And your school, this is not, in developing a curriculum, it's not something that you do only in your classroom or at your grade level. Curriculum is best developed is done at an institution level, at a school level, so that everybody from KG through grade 12 understands what the whole scope, we'll talk about that in a minute. But if you are in a country where this is the case, then I think you unfortunately have another responsibility, and that's to look at what is told that you use, and if possible, supplement it with something else to help include those things that are not included in the textbook. Yes, but Dr. Jake and I have worked in a country where they don't have a choice. They have to use what the ministry tells them to use. So does that speak to it?
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Dr. Ray. And I think with some of these too, you're going to hit them here just coming up in a few minutes too.
Okay. So again, just kind of a description. Curriculum includes the units, the lessons, the teachers teach, the assignments, the projects, the books, the materials, the presentations, the readings used, and the tests, assessments, and other methods used to evaluate student learning. These are all part of curriculum. It's not just an outline, but it's everything you do. Now, this is where individual teachers can get into, once they know this outline and what's expected of them, then they can start looking at how can I develop the materials, use the materials, make presentations, have readings, tests, assessments to describe or to help students understand the material. But you got to start with something, and that something is the outline of the curriculum. So breaking it down, an individual teacher's curriculum would be the specific learning standards, lesson assignments, and materials. But you've got to use the base that's established by your institution. You don't add things just because you think it's a good topic and you'd like to talk about it. If it doesn't fit where you are at your grade level, then it's inappropriate. Even though you might talk about some things that might be coming up, you have to understand that your responsibility is look at your institution's curriculum development. Because then if you don't, and you start bringing up something that you think is very interesting and so forth, and you don't know that maybe the students had it last year, or that maybe students are going to get it next year, or that it's probably not part of the basic curriculum. I was in a school once where a teacher told me, he said, I want to do this unit in, he named it. I know it's not part of our curriculum, but I really like to teach it. And I thought, if I were principal of this school and I found out that this teacher was doing something that he likes to do, but it's not part of the curriculum, we would have a meeting and we'd talk about your responsibility is at this grade level with what you've been given. Now, you can be part of the curriculum development and maybe at another time add this particular unit, but you don't just go off and say, well, here, I like it. I know it's not part of the curriculum, but I like it. So, breaking it down, curriculum is knowledge and skills, it's units and lessons, it's assignments and practices, it's materials, and it's tests, assessment. So that's what curriculum is. Now let's talk about the elements of curriculum, because I know we need to get here. So there are 4 elements of curriculum that we need to really understand: scope, sequence, integration, and continuity. Okay, briefly, we're going to describe these: scope, sequence, integration, continuity. Scope. It's best defined as the breadth and depth of content to be covered in a curriculum at each time. We're going to have a couple of examples later on in the workshop about scope, because many of us don't understand over a student's life all that you do in a given period. Now, scope is the whole KG through 12 idea, but scope can also be used in your individual classroom. We know that by the end of this year, we want students to have this skill, this knowledge, this particular piece of information, and that's the scope for the year. Or might even be the scope for the lesson. Remember, I said earlier, so many times we just teach and they don't really what is it we expect students to know or be or show at the end of this lesson. So scope is the whole thing, either through grade 12 when they're leaving, or at the end of this period, or at the end of this year, or whatever. So remember that scope is the expectation of what comes at the end. Now, sequence is the order in which content is presented to the learners over time with respect to the other parts of the curriculum. Sequence. We're going to talk about sequence in a little bit also. But you don't start students in the middle of a sequence and expect that they knew the stuff that happened before this. I've often said that if we really understand sequence, and I'm going to go back to the question that was asked, what are we going to do with students who, for whatever reason, missed it last year, didn't get there for whatever reason? If we understand sequence, we ought to be able to assess where that student is and find out, okay, what should have happened last year. So in many cases, even though we haven't had the COVID issue, in many cases, students will come into your class and they just didn't really get it last year. That's where, if we understand the sequence, we can help that student. But the other end of it is also important. Sequence is important because you will have students in your classroom who are very, very capable of doing whatever it is already. Sequence is important here because you know what's coming next. If they've already mastered, and they can demonstrate they've mastered those skills in 4th grade, it's going to be very, very boring to those students to make them sit and listen to everybody else. Help move them ahead because you know what's coming next. And that's why sequence is so important.
Hey,
now,
Dr. Ray, there's a couple questions about scope and how scope works together with sequence. Could you go over what scope is again for our participants? There's a couple questions about that.
Okay, the scope is the whole thing that we expect by the time students, and I'm going to give an example here later on scope and sequence, but let's pretend that in English grammar, that the scope, by the time they leave 12th grade, we expect students to be able to write a complete paragraph with properly spelled words, with proper verb noun usage, with good examples of what they are saying. You know, we have all these things, pretty high level stuff, but we don't expect that in grade 1. In grade 1, we might expect them to understand the alphabet, to understand 3-letter words, cat, dog, boy. But as we move them along, that's the sequence, getting to what we expect at the end. But even that kindergarten or first grade teacher knows at the end what we're expecting students to know or be able to show. That's the scope. So that and many times, I'll go back to my son and his 20 problems, 2-digit addition. You know, I would hope that a teacher would say, this is important for you to understand because next we're going to get into 3-digit additions. Then we're going to get into multiplication. And because then it all tends to make sense. So it's helping students understand in that sequence why that makes sense. It's not just something I want to do and I think this is good. So that's, I don't know if that helps at all, but.
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Usually described as a matrix chart. You can put a chart together. And if your curriculum development does not have a chart of what you're going to do at each grade level, and then at each grade level, that's broken down into the units at that grade level. And each unit is broken down into, it's a very complicated product. But you have to understand that that's the chart look, and you need to think about that in the curriculum development. It is a matrix, it's a chart of what can, and again, it's so everybody knows. And you know what, when you have a parent comes in who, like I did, and you know, I can look at the teacher's chart and say, well, tell me why 2-digit addition right now is part of the eventual expectation. And I knew, but many parents will come in and they don't know. So if you can help your students understand, and help the parents understand, and you understand as a teacher, this is part of the whole. It's not the whole, but it's part of a whole. Then together, scope and sequence of learning brings order. Think about that word. It brings order to what you're doing. Order to what you're doing. You're not just thinking, oh, come on. And you know what? Our students are very bright, even at the very early elementary grades. They know when things are in order. So if you understand scope and sequence, you can understand the natural progression. Now, let me just give you, here's just an idea. Here's one that put together for an example of maybe, okay, a scope and sequence. So let's look at grade 12. We expect that at the end of grade 12, that students will understand economics, current events, what's going on in our world. We expect that at the end of grade 12. But look about all the progress or the sequence getting to that point. Grade 1, it might be all about me, then my family, then my community, my city, my country, my continent. You see how this is progressing all the way down. So we get to the scope, which is we understand economics, we understand current events, we understand what's going on in our world. In fact, that's one of the reasons why we decided on this writing contest that we listed as the title for the essays, How I Can Make My World a Better Place. I wonder how the first grade student might write an essay on that compared to a 12th grade student. See, that's scope and sequence. Then integration. What does integration mean? It relates to different strands of a piece of curriculum and how that relates to other things occurring in the students' lives, either in other school subjects or outside the school in their home and community. Again, my favorite example is one that I personally encountered when I was principal. I was doing a classroom visitation in my US history teacher's class, and he was talking about the American colonies and all how this was developed and so forth. And he was writing on the board up there, and he turned around to his students and he said, some of these words might be spelled wrong, but you can learn to spell in the English class. That's not integration. That means spelling is only important in the English class. So integration. So how can you teach and Dr. Jake is going to be able to read this because I don't have the chat room available because of my slides. Give an example of how you can teach math and English at the same time. What's a quick example? How can you teach math and English at the same time? Dr. Jake, if you see some answers there, I'd like to see that.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's give them a few seconds to post something on there, and we can read that. How can you teach math and English together?
Is that a stumper?
I don't think so. Days of the week. Amber had a great one. Analysis of word problems. Elias, use of word problems. Problem solving questions. What is the meaning of descending and ascending? Oh, that's great.
Oh, that's a great one.
Oh.
What's the meaning? Write it out.
Problem solving. Marwa says by giving problems. Mr. Muhammad says in the word math problems. Fadila says problem solving questions. Athelia, shapes and word problems. Ahmed, teach it in English. That's it. I love that.
Let me ask a harder question. Put your thinking caps on. How can you teach English and physical education at the same time? That's a little harder.
English and PE together. I think that one would be that's a hard one.
That's a hard one. Anybody have an idea? I have one. That's why I asked the question.
Counting, instructions in flexing. That's a really good one. Sports day practice, action verbs. Oh, that's a really good one.
Now we're getting at it. You see,
yeah.
This is integration. My example is this. Usually, at least when I took physical education at the end of a particular unit, let's say it was how to shoot a basket and so forth. One way a PE teacher could do this, instead of having students demonstrate how to shoot a basket, we had to write the process of getting ready to shoot a basket. So writing. So there are all kinds of ways, and we can go on and on and on about integration, but we need to think creatively. Students will benefit from this. And finally, after integration, we're looking at continuity, and we've talked about this somewhat in sequence. It relates to previous learnings and future learnings. I know that last year in your science class, you studied the chemical elements. So this year, what we're doing is we're taking that knowledge on chemical elements, and we're going to apply that to how we mix chemical elements and how we can make dangerous situations and so forth. See, that's actually showing continuity. It relates to previous learning, and you know what? I'm in awe with the responsibilities that we all have as teachers. This is not easy stuff. This is something that if we think about it, we will encourage students. So now we're going to practice. We'll be very short on this. We're going to develop a curriculum that includes everything students need to know about how to lay a new carpet in the room. Okay, you've got a classroom, and let's say that we're going to lay a new carpet in the room. Now answer these questions. Give a brief description of what is included in putting a carpet down. A brief description. Number 2, what is the scope? What do we expect at the end? What is the sequence? How are we going to get to the end? How will the carpet laying be integrated with other areas of learning? And what is the continuity with previous and future learnings? So you're bright teachers. You have some ideas. Let's talk first of all. What's the scope? What do we expect at the end about laying a carpet in a new room? Dr. Jake, read the answers.
What are the steps to...
No, we're not at the steps yet.
Okay.
What do we expect at the end?
What do we expect at the end? The total area.
No, well, so the total
Defining
area.
the carpet.
What's that?
Figuring out the floor, the depth and the breadth.
Okay, that's all good stuff, but that's not what we expect at the end. What you're getting into there is sequence.
Yeah, what do we expect at the very end?
Well, let me just, because our time is running short. We expect to have a carpet in our room that's beautiful, that's usable, that is very much helps the improvement of the room. That's what we expect at the end. Now, the sequence is how we're going to get there. Now, what you have read, Dr. Jake, in some of the responses, they're sequential things. We've got to measure the room. We've got to figure out how many square yards of carpet we need. We have to understand the quality of the carpet. We have to understand how that color of the carpet might apply to the whole room decor. See, those are all sequence things.
But Dr. Ray, we have some people that are even looking further down the scope, and they're saying they want something that's comfy. They want a nice decoration.
Yeah. Okay. So that gets into the next one. How is it integrated with other areas? For instance, you said comfy. So then we're talking about some physical aspects of carpet laying. One that I wrote that I thought was kind of interesting is, what about in today's climate of economics with the whole idea of the environment? Is the carpet fitting the environmental needs of our city or country or whatever? Are we putting, for instance, I think we all know, because I have some in my home, any carpet that has nylon in it causes you to shock. Well, we have to think about those things. So how can that be integrated into what causes a shock? So what we're doing is we're now talking about those things. So let's hold on to this, because we're going to come back to it later. Now let's talk about standards and benchmarks. So here's some ideas, and I'll have to rush through these because Dr. Jake warned me that I had more material than I would do. And I, on the other hand, said, what if I go through this in 10 minutes? And he laughed at me and he said, he's never heard me speak to anything in less than 10 minutes. So standards and benchmarks. They define what a student should know, show at each benchmark level. And sometimes it's KG to 12, that's a benchmark. Maybe we have shorter benchmarks, grades 1 to 3 or 7 to 9. And sometimes if we understand not just what's happening at this grade level, but at the end of this benchmark, in fact, that's one of the reasons the MAP test is given to schools at benchmark levels, because there are certain expectations. It's not every grade level necessarily. So then we go into, let's go to a sample standard in English language arts. Here's an idea. The student, now understand, this is demonstrated. The student will demonstrate knowledge of sentence structure by consistently writing sentences with proper spelling, subject-verb agreement, and proper punctuation. It's what I mentioned earlier. That's probably a good scope. That's what we expect. That's a standard in English language arts. We might also say, well, how the student is going to demonstrate this. How many times does a student have to demonstrate that he or she knows this? Is it 3 out of 20? Is it 10 out of 20? Is it one valid example? All of these questions we have to answer. One of the ways we can do it is we can have students correct the work of others. That's a great classroom activity because students sometimes can help each other in a way. They might demonstrate some examples from reading. I was reading this passage and it was this. And can they show consistency over time? Can they show time after time after time? Now, if we assume that standard is for grade 9, what is the scope? What are the sequential pieces of learning? How can the integration of learning to write proper sentences be made with other subjects? And how can the 9th grade teacher demonstrate continuity with previous learning and what's to come? And so those are extremely important questions that you need to ask as you're developing your curriculum. But please remember, you don't develop the scope and sequence on your own. You can develop lessons, but you have to look at the whole school, the whole institution process. So then we get into a term that we use a lot these days. And so when we go into schools, say, well, we use Common Core. That's our curriculum. Again, I say that's good stuff, but it's not enough in and of itself. So first of all, we don't have Common Core in every subject area, but in those subject areas, here's what they emphasize: create, collaborate, communicate, and critical thinking. So as you can see, these are process type curricular questions. They don't say what the student demonstrates or what the student knows, but they say, we'll show you how to create, we'll show you how to collaborate, we'll show you how to communicate, and we'll show you how to critical thinking. And of course, I've read some examples of which Common Core can be misused. I've read some examples of in math classes when students can get to the right answer, but they're marked wrong because they didn't use the way that they were taught to do it, but they got to the right answer. So let's think about that. Then we talk about the introduction of the goals in a Common Core. Their students master increasingly difficult problems and tasks, not just memorize facts on a shallow level. And that's the real advantage of Common Core, is that you're able to demonstrate difficult problems and texts and not just memorize facts at that level. So then we look at Common Core will also help teachers increase their students' proficiency levels by focusing on skills. So if we learn the skill, we can increase our proficiency level by maintaining flexibility in how we teach, the manner best for students. And remember, every student you face is going to be at a different level. And assuming that everybody understands everything the same would be a mistake for any teacher. Now let's look at a Common Core standard. Students will practice and model complex problem solving through applying what they've learned to everyday situation. That's a beautiful, beautiful Common Core standards. So then we give assignments to show that they understand problem solving. So we talked about earlier about math issues and so forth. We just don't demonstrate, but we give them examples and problem solving so that they understand these different situations. Then we talk about Common Core in English and language arts. Students will focus on nonfiction texts. Students will be asked to digest information differently and demonstrate their analysis. That's not a goal, that's a process. And we have to understand in the Common Core, we're looking at some wonderful processes, but then how will students demonstrate that they understand this process? That's when we give them the Common Core. Now, if we compare these two standards, the one where we said about writing and the one where we understand about process, what is the difference? Would your instruction differ if you understood the difference? For instance, and I read this statement recently, I think I've shared it in a workshop before. Learning is what you have after what you have been taught has been forgotten. Think about that. Learning is what you have after what you have been taught has been forgotten. So if we teach students 2 + 2 or 2-digit addition numbers, that's great. But learning is learning how that applies. And so that's how they differ. Then we talk about Common Core standards define what students should be able to understand and be able to do. Well, what does understanding mean? One way for teachers to ask the student to justify in a way that is appropriate to the student why a particular statement or concept is true and what rules apply. So sometimes it's asking the student why, not what is the answer? How did you get to that answer? Why is that your answer? What information have you received before that helps you understand that? So Common Core helps you make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. Makes sense. Reason abstractly and quantitatively. And Common Core mathematics standards model with mathematics, apply mathematics to solve problems. Somebody mentioned, let's go back to the rug. You know, if we really understand measurement, we're going to be able to apply it in this standard. If we learn how to use the appropriate tools and use them appropriately, then we know that students are using the proper methods. Now, if you want to know more about Common Core, I would suggest you look at this website. It's www.corestandards.org. I've just really done a brief overview of it. But as you're developing your curriculum, don't neglect looking at Common Core standards. But just as much as I dislike it when I come in and say, talk about your curriculum, and teachers say, well, here's our textbook. I dislike that. But I also dislike it when we go and say, oh, that's easy. We do Common Core. Okay, what do you expect students to know? So that's why it's important. So look at that. So we can go over, we can demonstrate Common Core, and I'm going to hurry through these because as Jake suggested, these will be available to you, and I'm going to kind of skip over them. By the end of kindergarten, students will understand small numbers, and I'm not going to go through this. Students will understand the relationship. Students will understand and describe simple additions and subtractions. That's a standard. Students use estimation strategies, and these will all be available to you. Reading by the end of kindergarten, students demonstrate that they know letters, words, and sounds. Students will follow words from left to right. And we know that in some Far Eastern languages, it goes from right to left, and we understand that. But you see what these are definitely reading and math standards. In the scope from kindergarten to graduation, developmental line, students will demonstrate algebraic solutions of problems. I was going to ask Dr. Jake to describe the mathematics ones, but Dr. Jake, we're there. Students will solve equations, but get these ideas. These are just examples of where you will go from grade KG to grade 12. Now, finally, we want to talk about the questions that you had to answer for developing the carpet in a room. Same questions, but think of it in that way. The finished product is that carpet, which we like. The color is good, it's safe, it's helpful, everything. That's same thing in math and reading or any subject. So remember, curriculum, that's the whole stuff. Scope, what you expect at the end. Sequence, how you move to the end, grade level by grade level or unit by unit. Integration, how you apply this to other subjects. And continuity, what was before. Now, I had to add this slide recently because I think it's extremely important. And so I'm just adding this as a caution to you. Although the internet has brought many shortcuts and new information, it is dangerous, and I can't tell you strongly enough, it is dangerous to go on an internet site and say, hey, I want to find a teaching lesson in 7th grade English. That's dangerous, because what you don't know is if this is integrated, if this is part of the sequence of what you're supposed to be teaching, what your total curriculum is. You might think it's just great and it might pass your day and you feel really good because you presented a lesson to your students. But if it's not integrated into everything you're doing, you will be confusing not only your students, but yourself, because that's got to be why you work carefully as a school or as an institution. It will be confusing. And finally, I always like to end with something hopefully inspirational. And this is really important. Don't forget, sometimes the thing your students need right now has nothing to do with what is in the lesson. Remember this, what your students need right now. I especially challenge you with this at the beginning of this very difficult time you're going to be facing. What your students need right now might not have anything to do with your lesson plan. So I encourage you to be there, and I want to thank you. I know that I've hurried through these last few slides as Dr. Jake warned me that I would. The mission of Array Global, partnering with institutions in their improvement efforts to ensure students are prepared for a global society. That's what we do when we accredit your schools. We encourage you, if you haven't considered Array Global accreditation at this point, we encourage you to consider accrediting your school through us. Dr. Jake, I think, thank you for hosting this today. I didn't think I could host and deliver at the same time, so we're through.
Thank you, Dr. Ray. I think we're all motivated and inspired, and we have a lot deeper of an understanding of curriculum. I teach a curriculum leadership class, and every time I hear this presentation or talk to Dr. Ray about curriculum, I learn, and I'm just so pleased to be able to be part of this and be able to learn from him and many of the questions that you have. So thank you for that. Before we get into posting the survey, I just want to remind everyone that next Saturday we have another excellent workshop. It's called the 21st Century Education, a forum to discuss the changing educational landscape. We're all dealing with that right now, this changing landscape. It's going to be next Saturday again at 9 o'clock p.m. Saudi Arabia time. Sorry, you have to listen to Dr. Ray again. Or actually, we're very pleased to have him. Dr. Ray is going to present with myself and Dr. Salam Noor. We're the 3 founding board members for Array Global, and we're excited to be able to talk about the many questions that you have. So when you fill out the survey today, one of the questions is to give us your questions on what you want us to address next week. So please take that time now. I posted in the chat the survey. There's many people that we have with us on now. I'll post it a few times. I have it posted on our Facebook page and on our Zoom chat. So make sure you take a few minutes and start filling that out. And then just a reminder too, again, on the 3 different items that I talked about at the very beginning, if you want to send us your pictures of your first day of school, please do that. We want to publicize that on our social media. I've already received some, so thank you so much. Send it to info@arrayglobal.org. And then also, if you'd like Array Global to do a specific welcome back to school video for you and your school, your students, your staff members, please fill out that link that we posted earlier. I'll post those again. And then lastly, if you'd like Dr. Ray to come and visit your school, or just you visit with him and talk to him about the services or any questions that you may have, he's going to be in Saudi Arabia. He's excited to go there because we haven't been able to travel for a while. So please take your time and go out of your way to visit with him. You will not regret that at all. I posted those links in the chat box again. So make sure that you fill those things out. And I'll post the survey again for those of you that might have missed it. And while you're filling out that survey, Dr. Ray and I are going to address some of the questions that have come up in the chat that we didn't get to. If you're okay with that, Dr. Ray, we'll take about 10 or 15 minutes as people are filling this out, because it usually takes a little bit of time. Are you okay with that?
Sure, and please remember, I will be in Riyadh. At this point, I do not have any plans to travel outside of Riyadh. I'll be there only 7 days, and I have some schools already that I have agreed to visit. So I know that last week several of you from areas, either other countries or from other parts of Saudi Arabia, have indicated you'd like to see me. I would love to do that, and we will probably be back at least in the month of November, and we can talk about perhaps, if you would, like school visits at that time. We'll be glad to see if we can work that. But I'll only be there for, as I said, for 7 days. So we will try to answer all of the questions that you've already lodged to us, probably by email or some kind of message forum. And we can set up chats if you want to, either Zoom calls or through Facebook Messenger or something like that, if that will help you.
So Dr. Ray, one of the first questions about curriculum is from Shini Yasin. Writes, my students are struggling with reading and writing English because due to online lessons, we focus more on the subjects than the basic skills. Next year is going to be really challenging for us. I think everyone is facing that challenge right now with COVID and trying to teach English and a lot of the basic subjects online. And I think the best ways that we can do to keep students engaged is to make the classes engaging as possible. Make sure that they have their camera on and you can see them, you can interact with them, that you're communicating with them, and that you're using the chat box. People can type things in there. If little kids, they can do thumbs up and do different ways to keep them engaged. We've done several different workshops on that, but I think that's so important to keep that sequence of curriculum being implemented. Dr. Ray, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I do. Again, as I said, they're going to be very difficult for all teachers this year. You're going to face a whole issue that you've never faced before. Every student needs to feel special. Every student needs to be special. And, you know, just because I get very high on emotion with teachers and students, go in and read the story. We've posted it on our Facebook page about Teddy Stoddard and Mrs. Thompson. Here's a great example of the very situation that you've described, how a student was just, he's checked out, not doing anything. But because the teacher showed special interest, and this doesn't mean that you have to spend hour after hour with individual students, but find something in that student's life that you can relate to, and if necessary, if it's virtual only, if necessary, do a private virtual conversation. I see Tony Crawford here. Tony, I noticed that you weren't listening to the lesson we were talking about today. Tell me, did it not meet your expectation? You see, I'm picking on my friend here, but you see, sometimes just by singling somebody in a nice way, not in front of everybody, but in a nice way. Tony, how can I make this more meaningful to you? Colin, I noticed that when we were talking about this, you had a question and I didn't get to it. Could we talk about that now? Or let's look at Muhammad here. Who's my friend Muhammad Amada? You know, here's my friend Muhammad. Muhammad, I know that in your home, your father has been busy at work lately. He's had to leave the country because of his job. How are you doing at home? You see, those little things that if you can start doing those on an individual basis, if you need to, or how about this? I noticed that many of you seem to not understand, so I need to help. How can I make this more understandable? So it's that individualization, but you got to know where they are. You got to know where the problems are, but you can't do that just by standing and lecturing and say, okay, everybody get it. I said it. If you didn't get it, that's your problem. No, you've got to find individual situations and try to touch one person at a time.
I think that's so important when we talk about the relationships part. I mean, we talk about the process of education so much, but we don't talk about what is most important, the people aspect part, the relationship part. And I love that story. We've posted it. We'll have to post it again. It's funny, as we were talking about some of those ideas, some other people came up with the different ideas to keep students engaged online. Visuals, games, quizzes, word wall. People were getting very, very good at it. The next question, Dr. Ray, is from Amber Dabir. How can we make sure that we divide the curriculum to attain all learning objectives in a specific time frame due to the current situation?
I'm not quite sure I understand what
I think
she means by divide the curriculum.
Yeah, probably focus on the main standards. How do we make sure that they're learning the objectives that are going to help students be successful in the next grade level because they've lost so much due to COVID?
Well, one of the things that I think we have to do is we have to understand what the objective is at the end. What is that objective? And if we find some things that will help us get there where we're, and we might skip over some things. We have to say, what's most important? What's most important at the end of this grade or at the end of this unit for students to know? And let's concentrate on those things. And it's just like, okay, today, I'll give you an example. I just did it. When I got to the end of my presentation and Dr. Jake told me I would not be able to finish it, I left all of those slides for you to read. I know I didn't get a chance to talk all of them. But you're very bright teachers. I know, I've met most of you. You're very bright. And I just know that you'll be able to read them and probably understand them, especially in light of what we already talked about. Your students can be much like that. Okay, class, I wasn't able to get to this passage in this book today, but would you read this and try to apply what we talked about already to this particular chapter or this passage? Let's give our students some credit that they can pick up if we just give them a chance.
Absolutely. And another part about teaching and instruction and ensuring that we have a balance in using our time wisely, Abir Anwar had a question about placement tests and assessments in general. How can we best use those assessments to track and monitor curriculum implementation and planning?
Okay, two things. When we're talking about placement tests, let's talk first of all about placement at a particular level per student. Okay, and say those placement tests, if we're really important, if we do an analysis or some kind of a check-in at the first of the year to find out where students are in this particular subject, then we can start placing them in appropriate learning groups to help them at that level. But the other thing that's extremely important is what we call external assessments. And we require, every accrediting agency requires each school to have an external assessment. The external assessment is something that is not developed by your school. It is a commercial product which you buy, and some are more expensive than others, which you buy. And if you give this to your students at the appropriate grade level, you will be able to find out at your school as a whole, how are students performing compared to students from other schools in your country, other schools in the world, other schools, whatever the geographic area is. And that place or that external assessment is extremely important, because if you just give assessments based on what your school puts together, you might be looking at it with eyes that aren't seeing clearly because you see it in your light. But if you have a good external assessment that really looks at all schools or all schools in the area, it will give you a better idea of where your students. So it's both the individual placement to find out if you do a placement test, for your students at the beginning of the year, and you find that 90% of them don't have that skill, that tells you what you ought to do. If you find that 20% don't have that skill, that gives you some idea about some varied assignments to help those students prepare.
I think, yeah, assessment's so important to this entire process.
That's a whole nother workshop.
Yeah, a whole different one. Well, there's a great question from Mohammed Al-Hadidi. He talks about, what about the yearly plan? Isn't it an element of curriculum?
Well, of course. Remember when I said scope is not just KG, or as somebody said, I hope you don't forget pre-K and so forth, KG to 12. But scope is also what at the end of this year, as long as it fits in knowing what the end is and knowing what the sequence is. Yes, the yearly plan, the unit plan, the semester plan, the unit plan, those are all parts of it. It's little parts to make a whole. So it's going at this particular subject, which leads into the next one, which leads into the next one, which leads into the end of the year. And here's what we want at the end of the year and how that fits with the whole scope of the subject matter.
Yeah, I think that's great. And talking about scope and sequence, Roderick Suarez de Leon, great, what beautiful name, asks, what is the difference between learning objectives and learning competencies? Are they the same?
I don't know. I haven't been presented with that question, but my initial answer is yes. It sounds like the same thing. It sounds like two different words for the same meaning, unless some of you have some idea. Some of you have some idea that I don't. But yet to me, it sounds like the same.
Yeah, I agree. I think so. We just have a few more questions because people are still on and they're still filling out the survey, it looks like. I have a question from Mahaned Imad asks, what if the standards of learning are too much for students to understand in one educational year? Should we summarize it, or should we focus on the basics? How can we just focus on the standards that are most applicable?
That's where you go back to curriculum review. Your school needs to know that. You know, in my year, we were supposed to do all of these things, and there was just too much. That's where the whole school has to get together. And they're one of two things, maybe three things. Either the teacher did not use his or her time wisely, or the students were not prepared for that, or it was too much, as I think the purpose of the question, it was too much in 1 year. Then you've got to look at it. Let's look at the end, and I always say the best way to develop a curriculum is start with the end in mind. What do you expect students to know at the end of grade 12? If we know that, what do you expect students to know at the end of grade 11 to get ready for 12? at the end of grade 10 to get ready for 11 and all the way back. And if you start doing that kind of analysis, hopefully you'll find where there is a real problem. And then remember, when we were talking about curriculum mapping at the very first, and I said, this isn't a curriculum mapping workshop. If you do curriculum mapping, it'll show gaps or too much of one subject in the curriculum. That's why it's another workshop, another time on curriculum mapping. And that's where you'll find that.
Yeah, and our good friend Ahmed Rashad just posted in the chat. What about if the time is not enough to complete the curriculum? And part of that is, and I think Miss Jessica and Miss Gemma did a great presentation on this not too long ago about going through and doing the jackpot standards. Them coming from Las Vegas, that's why I specifically remember that workshop, but just focusing on the jackpot standards, those main standards that students are going to need to know in order to move on to the next grade level. You can find all of our recorded workshops on our YouTube channel. I posted that in the chat. Please go there. You can review a lot of those different ideas and thoughts and help you as you're getting back to school, whether it's online or face-to-face. Well, Dr. Ray, I think those are all the questions that we have, unless you want to take some more.
No, it's a beautiful day in Denver, Colorado.
Yeah.
The sun is shining beautifully. There's a light breeze. The temperature is in the high 80 Fahrenheit, which is warm. Sitting in my office looking out at the golf course. My office is right next to a golf course, so I'm watching these happy golfers go by. And anyway, that's about where I am at this point right now.
Yeah, well, I don't have sun outside. We have rain, which we haven't had rain for quite a while, but it's beautiful and comfortable out. But we appreciate everyone for coming. We had several hundred people on with us today, many on Facebook, most of the people on Zoom. So thank you so much for attending, and thank you again, Dr. Ray, and appreciate all your guidance, your support, and your mentorship.
Well, and thank you, and please remember that Dr. Jake, Mr. Danny, Dr. Magoo, the four administrators of Array Global, we're always happy to help. Just write and ask. We'll do what we can.
Thank you, and have a great weekend.
Yes.